thought a good place to start would be an Instagram caption, an Instagram picture that I saw when I was stalking your profile prior to the interview.
Hmm.
And it was about you driving 5 hours to see your mother from Virginia to New York.
Yeah.
And we spoke a little bit about this over Instagram DM. But your caption, part of your caption was the best poetry is in words, not action. And you
Or
use that in
or you mean like
sorry.
action in action, not words, or
I hope I wrote it down right. Was it the part of the caption was some of the best poetry is in action, not words. Sorry,
yeah.
I flipped them up. I wrote it down incorrectly. So yeah, just to correct that, some of the best poetry is in action, not words, and that was part of your caption for going to visit your mother for Mother's Day, a surprise
Mhm.
visit. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit on your relationship with your mother and what she has meant to you.
Holy goodness, that's a huge that's such a huge thing for me because the story with my mother is not one that I think that was it's not storybook. It wasn't always super great. I mean, my family life was always very good, but my mom and I are very alike, but we also sparred so much when I was
Mm-hmm.
growing up. I feel like that I owe so much of the lessons that I learned to her. But also like even how I grew in terms of like learning the other side of things because I always was very much like I disagreed with her on so many things. And when I moved out, which was I feel for anybody that is having trouble with the relationship with their parents, that moment when you move out, suddenly that dynamic changes in a way which might make it easier for people to kind of relate. And that was a while back. Suddenly, I saw a whole new side of her that I didn't really get to appreciate as much when I was growing up and having to clean up the house and doing all the things that moms often ask. And I think that that's part of what I find just the work in being a person in the world is just to try to make better the places which weren't as always good, and also to make even better the places that are good. And my so it's been a complicated relationship, but it's one where I think because we do happen to have so much in common, it really does mean that in the end, things have been so really good, and we've had great conversations and related a lot on things that we didn't originally relate before. If that kind of makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. No. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure other people have had similar experiences in quarantine. I've been in solo quarantine, so I've had a lot of time by myself, a lot of time to think, a lot of time to unpack childhood experiences, and I realized how kind of messed up and how, you know, everything with your childhood can kind of get bundled together in this one feeling where you say I feel this way about my childhood, and it's all muddled together, and
Hmm.
it's super complicated, super uh very intense to go through, and we just kind of assign these general thoughts and feelings to a huge period of our life that lasted over a decade. And so I'm starting to unpack these experiences and thinking about things in certain ways, and how it's made me who I am today. Things that I run towards from my childhood, things that I think I've run kind of like gone against from my childhood.
Hmm.
Like my behavior today is a reaction against what I experienced in my childhood. And so I've just been going through a bunch of individual experiences, and one of the things I've been thinking about is my relationship with my dad, and how, my dad's always been great, and he's been a great provider, but he hasn't always been the most emotionally available person.
Yeah.
And so I think I harnessed a lot of anger towards my dad, but the more I think through it, the more I've begun to just accept that I'm different than my dad, and he raised me. He did the best with what he had, the attributes he
Hmm.
had. So I totally understand the the going back and kind of looking at the relationship with your mother, and I know it's obviously different, but kind of like unpacking things that happened in your childhood, disagreements and stuff like that.
Yeah, and luckily when I moved out, I was able to kind of start that process pretty early on. But with my mom, it was very similar. That there was an intense level of providing that. And it's funny because we also play those roles. So in my own marriage, in my own life, she was the workaholic, and she in a good way she helped support and provide the family so much, but she would sometimes come home stressed. And sure enough, I have started parroting those same behaviors. And it's so interesting how we learn some of those things, but it's not a critical thing. It's that we have to make the choices to live our lives the way that we best can and unpack those lessons. And that unpacking is not a static process. Therapy sometimes doesn't even get to the root of it, even when therapy is supposed to be good at it. It's really I don't want to say that like we're stumbling through, because that sounds a little bit negative, but really sometimes things happen by accident, and that's and then we kind of learn and grow from those lessons. So yeah,
Yeah.
I totally get that.
So for people who may not be familiar with your work, could you describe to people what it is you do and how you became the walking mall poet?
So I am a busking street poet, a street performer in Winchester, Virginia, which is a small city, is the way I would describe it, outside of Northern Virginia. If you leave DC and you keep going, and then you keep going, you hit us before you start hitting West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing street performing poetry, what I do is I go out there with an antique typewriter, one of the many in my collection, and I will sit with a sign. And when someone comes up and they want a poem, I can write a poem in less than 10 minutes, usually in 5 minutes, and come up with that poetry on the spot. And then I read the poem, and oftentimes that is accompanied by conversation. If the poetry is dealing with something very personal in their life, it might even get even more kind of almost into kind of like intervention and conversation about what someone's dealing with. There's a lot of celebration involved in that. And then sometimes I do events as well. So it kind of just goes into all that.
How did you get into being a busking poet? Because it seems like it's definitely not a traditional career, and with all the emphasis today on going to college, getting a degree in something that's going to make me a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of pressure for people to think like that, but you've managed to make a living doing something completely outside that. How did that progression happen?
It through a lot of frustration, and kind of going back to like how things kind of happen by accident too. So it's funny you mentioned college, because I really did not have a good college track. I went off to college after Chaminade High School, where I went to, and then I spent 3 years at the college I was at in DC. And part of what I valued and found so much meaning in that point in my life was my relationship with my now wife. And so we were doing long distance for 3 years. And the way and everybody goes through a different journey when they're doing long distance, but the way it went for me was I was very faithful, I was very devoted, I was very enthusiastic about being with her, but I kind of lost my mind a little bit. You spend so much
Yeah.
time away from that person. So I actually dropped
How,
out.
how did
Yeah.
you lose your mind? In what way did you lose your mind?
Oh goodness. Well, I couldn't. It was a combination of factors. I was not doing well in my classes. I wasn't enthusiastic. Depression kind of really took a hold. And I just didn't want to be there. I even applied to transfer her to her school, but then I found out I wouldn't be able to graduate on time, and there was a whole bunch of things. And I just wanted to be in a more comfortable environment at that point. I hope that does that story justice, because it was a very complicated time in my life, because you don't get into your senior year and think, oh, you just got to leave now. Like that's kind of like it was very much that I had pushed myself to a point. Anyway, I left, and then I wanted to be a writer. So I worked days at a furniture store, and spent nights working on a novel draft that I didn't end up finishing. But I fell in love with poetry through that time, and had been doing poetry before. So then I started trying to submit for poetry. And submitting for poetry, trying to get poetry published, is also a little bit of a weird environment because most journals are run by MFA programs, and MFA programs are it's a very different type of poetry writing than what you would normally think is poetry. Like when someone has this concept of poetry, they think of like, rhyming and getting a sense of meaning and be able to read the words. I'll tell you, I read some of these MFA journals and I don't know what they're talking about. And I think I'm a poet with a really sense of metaphor and things like that. And the ideas are very layered into a point where it's literally so hard to understand. I submitted a bunch of, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that reminds me of a quote from Eric Weinstein. I don't know if you listen to the Portal podcast at all.
No,
but he's a mathematician. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast a few times, which I'm a huge fan of. And I'm gonna butcher this quote, so I'll just paraphrase it. But he said something along the lines of, "Every subject is easier than the people who get paid to teach it would have you believe."
Absolutely.
because it like, by having complicated language and by having this barrier to entry where I need to teach you how to do something, you can't go out and learn it yourself. It's self-preservation. It preserves your job in a world where there's increasing access to self-learning.
That is actually really perfect of analogy. And I'll tell a story which really revealed this really well. So my wife is actually an English major, so she has some skill sets in going through scansion, looking at metaphors. And I mean, I've developed my own as a poet as well, but she has a pretty strong skill set in working through those things. And so we just pointed to a random poem in one of these journals. I think it was Jubilat was the name of it. We're like, all right, we're going to scan this poem. We start going through it, and we start going through the metaphors, and I can't remember exactly the metaphors. And about halfway through the scansion, we looked at each other and we said, this poem's about a blowjob. And we were like, how did we end up here? Like, how did this get in here? Like, it was something about like the circles, like a donut was mentioned. There was a whole bunch of things. And we were like, holy crap, this poem is the only conclusion that we could lead to with the scansion was that it was about a blowjob. And I was like, you would not have gotten that from reading the poem, and you would not even have gotten that from thinking about the poem for a minute. But when you broke everything down, you were like, wow, it's and that, I mean, it wasn't a bad poem. It was just more so that it was completely inaccessible. The meaning was completely inaccessible to anybody that wanted to, may say, pick up a book and read like an average person, and so, yeah. And so you're absolutely right that there's this sense of in a lot of the MFA journals I've seen of making things more complicated than they need to be.
Yeah. Before I interjected, you were going, you were talking about how you got into the walking mall poet, the progression from college to becoming a full-time poet.
Well, it's because it's a long story, but like in a good way. And so I got frustrated with submitting with these journals, and this is kind of where everything kind of hit. And that was around the time that I, moved down to Winchester. My wife had been, she got a job teaching in the city. And I was getting a little bit more into typewriters. I was starting to buy some more word processing machines. My wife got this, and she got the idea, started with her, and she got the wonderful idea of, hey, why don't you try writing for people on the mall? And I was like, well, that'd be fun. So she pretended to be some people using her theater background, and she's a theater major, and after being an English major. And then she pretended to be some people. I shot off a couple of verses. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I took it out for Valentine's Day of not this past year, but the year before. And the first poem I wrote for someone, I think it was really wrote for them, was about Moon River. That was a prompt. And she was so moved by it that she went and ran to the ATM and put a bunch of cash in my hand. And I was like, what? Because I had just brought a sign. I was like, I'll do some poems. I really wanted the benefit. Like, I don't do it for the money. I do it for the joy of being able to give someone that experience of verse. And that was the start of it there, is I knew that I had stumbled on something with such value to people. And I'm not trying to say that to build myself up, but it's shocking because that had been, when that happened, it was the most money per word that I had ever made in my life. Like up to that point, like I had tried writing a novel and submitting and, sending queries to editors, and that wasn't working. And I tried submitting to journals, and all that wasn't working. And I even got published in some smaller local journals, but that was the first time it clicked. And at that point, I just, it took off.
Yeah, so like someone had to assign you, or not assign you, but someone had to give you value in exchange for the work you were providing as an impetus for you to say, okay, this is possible for me to make a living like this. You weren't really thinking about it from a monetization standpoint until someone said, this is worth so much to me, X amount. I would love to give you this, and then that kind of kickstarted the
Yeah.
process.
Yes, absolutely. And the street poets industry, if you call it that, there's a lot of different aspects to it. There are some street poets that have always done it just free, wanting to write poetry, have fun, and there's others that have, really wanted to find the value of being able to create something that someone, because also when you do pay for something like that, it does assign value to it. And I've heard people calling me, telling me later on that they framed their poems. One person decided to buy a home because I wrote about the city and they had requested a poem about the area. Yeah.
Someone decided to buy a home in
Winchester,
Virginia, after they read one of your poems about it.
Yeah, well, they had come to the Walking Mall and they had said, we're thinking about buying a home, and I said, oh, let me write you a poem about buying a home. And it wasn't about necessarily Winchester specific. It was just about the joy of finding a new place in those four walls. And then they walked back later on that day. They walked back to the Walking Mall and they said, we drove out. It was a home on a farm. They said we drove out to the farm. We put an offer. And we came back. And I was like, holy crap!
You should set up a side deal with real estate agents in the area and say, hey, I'll keep writing poems about Winchester, and then I'll attract people to buy homes in the area. You just got to give me 20% of whatever.
There we go. Right? Yeah, Sunny Winchester. I'll and that would be real funny, and finding a sense, because poetry gives words meaning into that. Like, it gives situations meaning.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of the most creative people on the planet struggle to ask for the true worth of what their work represents and what it's giving to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't put myself in that category at all. I'm creating podcasts, but I'm in the middle of setting up a Patreon, and it sounds weird. It feels weird. There's some insecurity that I still haven't worked through in terms of asking people for money for something that you create. I love doing podcasts, and I've had people that are interested in setting up podcasts and offering to exchange money. Similar to what happened with you. I was just putting it out for a while, and people said, oh, I would give you this much to set up a podcast for me or record this for me. And then it kind of got the wheels turning. Okay, there's value to this here, but it still feels weird on some level for asking people for money for things. And I don't know what that is. There's so many creative people that aren't rich that should be, because of the value that they provide to society. And I don't know if it's because of something that's similar to what I'm feeling, or because of maybe people just haven't given them the value in exchange for what they're creating. But I don't know what that is, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think that I'm trying to find the right words, because I stumbled upon something. I didn't necessarily go looking for that. And when I found it, I kind of just started taking advantage of it. But it's one of those things that we believe as artists. I think this was really a core trouble with me before this, is we believe as artists that we're doing something that everybody else can do. Like, I write words. It's very easy to type words. I think it's easy because I've, been cultivating the craft and everything. But like, I think I have such a autodidact view of the world. Autodidactism is self-learning. It's just a fancy Greek word for it. And so I think that everything can be taught. It's my personal philosophy. Everything can be taught by your own self. So it's hard for me because I go, wow, I'm looking at the street poetry. Anybody can do this street poetry. But in reality, that's not true. What you're doing with your podcasts, while there's a lot of podcasters out there, the quality product that you've put out with Auxoro, I'm plugging you here, and but definitely, but the quality product that you've created ultimately gives people meaning, and people will pay ridiculous amounts of money to have and feel that meaning. And obviously, that how do you sense that transaction is kind of tough. I think that I'm still feeling that out with my own Patreon. What do I put behind versus in front of a paywall? Where do I think that people are going to have that sense of meaning, and where are they going to say, all right, I'm willing to pay for this and that. But I think that when any creator sits up and realizes that they are actually putting something unique in the world, I'm lucky because I think there aren't a lot of street poets, so it's very easy for me to perceive that. But there also aren't a lot of awesome podcasters either. And so if when you internalize that, when any creator internalizes their exclusivity, it's almost like then it turns into an affirmation. Like you walk around like, oh yeah, I'm the poet, and it was actually a transformation when I went from I do poetry to I am the poet. And while I don't want to sound pretentious by saying that, I definitely don't believe that what I do comes from myself. I have a strong belief in, that God gives me a gift to do this. And so I have that selflessness about it. But when we realize that we're actually very unique as creators in the world and unique in our own audiences, it hopefully helps us learn how to make that ask in a way that doesn't sound pretentious, but also does sound like, this has value. This is something that's worth paying for.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just watching a TED Talk from, it was given by the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and I'm blanking out on her name, so I apologize. Yeah. But it was about how many creatives suffer, and her hypothesis was that it has to do with when the narrative changed from the things that I create are due to some outside force that I'm not really in control of, to I control everything I create. So therefore, if I'm not in a flow state or if I'm not making good work, then there's something wrong with me. And she said that she kind of shifted her view to, I think it was before the Enlightenment and even in ancient times, where people viewed creativity as coming from someone else, like a god or some force. And then that kind of took the pressure off of her to write, because she was like, look, I'm going to show up today and sit down at the keyboard for 5 or 6 hours. So I'm doing my job. If that creative force, whatever it is, doesn't show up, that's not on me. But it's when it is there, I'll be there too. Yeah. So I'll let it flow through me. And I thought that was a really cool way to look at it, and kind of keep in mind that just because you sit down to do something every day doesn't mean that you're always going to be on point. Sometimes things are out of your control.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I've learned from doing my Twitch show is, and then also you become really comfortable with the when the moments aren't perfect, because that's, a quote that a friend of mine said, I don't know if he came up with it himself or if he had heard it from somewhere else, is that artists, writers and creators in general, they can find use in anything. So like I spent a couple, like probably like 3 or 4 months back, when I was wasting time, I spent a bunch of afternoons watching a bunch of Fortnite videos. I don't play video games anymore. I was just watching all these Fortnite videos. And then I was doing my Twitch morning word show stream, where I just write a half hour every morning. And this guy popped on. He was like, hey, this might be out of your wheelhouse, but can you write a poem about Fortnite? And I was like, yes, I can. And I talked about building towers in the sky and the map shrinking and the craziness of all the dances as well. And so I had enough like semi knowledge for that. I think that kind of riffs off in a different direction, but even the point is, even when you don't get that inspiration and you're not in that place to write something amazing, you're still learning something from those moments, even if you're just learning something from yourself.
So what drew you to Fortnite? Were you actually playing Fortnite too, or you just had a fascination with watching the streaming videos?
Oh, I just I when I waste time, I'll just float on video game replays. There's a couple of really funny guys out on YouTube that just do funny commentary, things like that. So I'll just, sometimes I'll zoom in on that and have a good time with that.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes. I plan on looking at 5 or 10 minutes of a YouTube video during lunch, and then sometimes an hour and a half later, I'm like,
Right.
what the fuck just happened?
Exactly.
I just watched a video on hunting elk, and then I went to stand up comedy, and then like
The
YouTube is
YouTube deep
deadly with
dive.
the recommended. Yeah.
Yeah. How did I get here?
Yeah. Where am I? So as a poet where people are coming up to you and regularly asking for your work, and you're having conversations with people, what is something that you think you understand about people that others may not understand fully or have a grasp on, just because you've had so many in-person interactions?
um, Everybody is deeply emotional. And I know that seems like it's 2020 and a lot of people are openly emotional, I think, on social media, things like that. But there is what is wild about the poetry is that when someone comes up, something clicks when I say, "Hey, you want a poem about something?" And a lot of times I'm writing nice, happy poems about dogs or about, hey, I love my wife.
Fortnite.
Fortnite, yeah, no, like stuff like that, fun stuff. But sometimes, and more often than I expected it, is I'll have someone come up and I will have them share a story, share something that they might not have shared with other people before, something that they might be going through, and I think that a kind of an extension from that is that people want to relate in a creative way. I had this realization a couple, like a few days ago with my wife, because I go to therapy on a regular basis. I like
Mm-hmm.
unpacking that type of thing. I feel like it's kind of going like going to the doctor, and I realized that part of the challenge with therapy is that you sit there and you go to someone, "Oh, I'm feeling this," and they go, "Oh, well, you're going through this and that type of thing," and then you kind of have a conversation about it. But it's not like what is we interpret the way we live our lives through stories and through art, and so people want to look at their life in a way of a story or through the art of a poem. And when people have asked me for they've asked for a prompt where they might be dealing with growing old and struggling with that, or I had a lady that had just come out of a violent relationship and she was really struggling with that, and they want and I get scared because they're putting their suddenly I'm holding their heart in my hands, and I even if I'm just trying to write something nice in response, they deeply appreciate it and they deeply want those things. So I think that that's something that really has stood out to me. And also that there are a lot more poets than we realize. That most people are writing some sort of verse somewhere in some notebook that they're not showing anybody. And that
Yeah,
is
secret. We live in a society of secret creatives where everyone's afraid to show what they create.
right. Yeah. And I'm always, and I respect when people don't want to show it, but like, I'm always like, yeah, get loud and
Yeah.
proud. Like everybody's, poetry is beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and not to hate on people that create just as a hobby, or they don't want to show people, because I think there is value in creating
Yeah.
things that you have no intention of releasing or no
Yes.
intention of making a living from. Even if you're an investment banker and you go home and you write mediocre music on guitar and you just
Yeah.
record it, you just record it just for fun. I started experimenting with making remixes of certain instrumentals over quarantine, and experimenting with rap lyrics and singing, even though my voice is nowhere even close to mediocre. Um, it's cool to just create things and not worry about what people are going to say, and to just have the intrinsic motivation of, I'm going to create this and I don't care what happens, because I'm probably not going to release it. But then I also do think that there are people that want to release it, but for some reason they're invested too much in the opinions of other people, where they're not holding back because it's a hobby or they don't really care for it that much. They're holding back because they think that people are going to think about them a certain way, or their friends will think of them different, or they don't want to see the negativity on social media for whatever reason it is. And that's something that every creator that puts themselves out there, as has to struggle with.
Yeah, Absolutely. It was I still get super scared that like a poem I write, someone is going to just throw it back in my face and be like, "No, this is crap," and it's going to be, and then suddenly my whole world is like falling apart. But I frankly have never gotten that response, and I'm thankful for that. But yeah, it is so, I think that's the other cool thing about what I do that really helps make it relatable is that because there's always so many people that do appreciate poetry on a secret level, or at least or even sometimes write it. They don't. There's no large scale market of poetry out there, except when there's a guy sitting out there, say, with a sign that says "Poems for Everybody,"
Mm-hmm.
and so they can very quickly and easily relate to what's happening in that moment. They'll look at the poems. I watch them as they go. They'll look at the poems. They'll be rereading them, seeing where the turns of phrases, how I position my lines. They like words as art, and they kind of come away with that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, do you see a path for poetry to re-enter the mainstream? Because there was a time where poetry was super popular, and that was what, not that it's popular today in certain circles, not that it doesn't
Yeah.
have value today, but it's not, when you go to Barnes and Nobles or Amazon, they're not pushing poetry books.
No.
And
Yeah.
do you see a path for poetry to re-enter the mainstream? Because it makes sense that it would. People's attention spans seem to be getting shorter and shorter in many aspects with social media, and poetry many times is the shortest form of writing you can read. It's only maybe sometimes a 30-second investment, 60-second,
Exactly.
5-minute investment. But I was wondering, why do you think it hasn't become mainstream with the attention span? I feel like it would fit in perfectly to that.
I think that well, firstly, and I love rap. That's one of my main inspirations is rap. And I think that
Really?
if we're going to be, if someone asks me who my favorite poets are, I start with William Wordsworth and then I say Kendrick Lamar. That's in that order.
Wow.
And I think that there is still, we're two white guys talking. I think there's a stigma around rap because of race and the look and the stereotypes surrounding it that totally needs to go away for so many people that kind of go, "Oh, rap music's kind of intense." It's actually fantastic, amazing wordplay when you really get down to it and really listen to it. So I think that is maybe a barrier that I hope would be broken down over time. And there's a lot of people that listen to rap. Like, it's not a question of.
Yeah.
I think that it's more so where there's a segment of the population that goes, "Oh, it's rap." It's not real singing, but that's not. It's poetry. It's absolute poetry. But I think more so. I think more appreciation of just plain, straight to the point, beautiful verse is important. Like my real pivot in seeing that poetry was really viable for the public square was when I read Billy Collins. And I would recommend anybody that's interested in poetry and feels disillusioned by reading something that seems obscure from a journal or something like that to read Billy Collins. Billy Collins is just there to the point. He's witty. He's fun. He's been published by the New York Times. And I think that, I think that and like you see it in some places where poetry seems to be getting a greater appreciation. Like spoken word has become pretty powerful. There's a Facebook advertisement, and I don't like propping ads, but like there was a Facebook advertisement right around the beginning of quarantine, and I don't remember the name of the artist that it referenced to, but they basically used a clip from the spoken word artist about kind of stumbling in the dark and be appreciating people's faces. It was all about people's faces. And I wish I had the name of the artist on me because it was beautiful. It was absolutely, like, it made me cry. And Facebook uses an advertisement kind of to give, because they sense the meaning in that. So I like the idea of more public poets, and I like the idea of more people reading poetry and gathering together to do poetry. I don't think everybody has time for that, but I think that would help. So yeah, I guess those are some of my ideas on how poetry can expand.
I love that you list Kendrick Lamar in your top 2 poets. If someone was new to rap, or maybe super casual rap listener, only heard the mainstream songs, is there any song by Kendrick Lamar that you recommend starting with that may not be a super popular one?
Oh goodness. I have to literally check my Spotify because
No, yeah,
what
go
it
ahead.
is Kendrick is telling Kendrick's story is such an amazing journey through kind of his understanding of the challenges of African Americans in this country, and I just have so much appreciation, and obviously I have no understanding of it because I'm so outside of it. Um, there is this, and so what I like to tell people is that it's also a start on empathy. I think that I think it's the art of peer pressure, and in part because, and I want to make sure that that's the actual song, because
The song is called "The Art of Peer Pressure."
yeah, because it tells his story about how he got involved or like how he or how basically someone got involved in a gang shooting, and there's so much first of all so much wordplay, and then you have empathy. It requires empathy to listen to those stories that are so different from yours, and poetry and writing is all about empathy. I would say, I mean, I listen to a lot more of I just love his wordplay. I don't know if I would really
Hmm.
recommend a specific song. I'm looking it up. But yeah.
Yeah, but I'm guilty more than anyone of not paying attention to the lyrics as much in rap because we're in such a melodic wave right now where I think words are minimized and it's more about how the production sounds and the sound of the music and what's going to make it on a top 40 playlist.
Yeah.
And I love great production. I'm a big believer in that music has to sound good in order for people to consume it. So if you have great lyrics on and shitty production, it's like you're putting these amazing words on a shredded canvas. Like why not build the production up? And Kendrick Lamar's production is insane.
Yeah.
Whoever he's working with, or if he does it
It's been
by
insane since
himself.
day one. Yeah, I does not, they definitely don't want to discount the music side of all that.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely been in many areas a devolvement. I don't know if that's a word, a de-evolution of the lyrical importance in rap because
Mhm.
people are willing to listen to things that sound good, even if the lyrics aren't super meaningful, myself included. I love rap when I work out. I use it to get myself into a certain mood a lot where I'm just
Mhm.
trying to elevate myself or maybe I'm trying to get pumped up or something like that. But I've you lose sight of how someone like Kendrick Lamar is a poet because you're not really thinking about the words on their own when it's mixed
Mhm.
together so beautifully with the production.
And it is the art of peer pressure, and part of the reason why I think it's such a good entry point is because again, that from a very outsider standpoint, from somebody that might not be knowing anything about rap, I'm trying to put myself in those shoes, and they might be like, oh my goodness, rap is all about it's all about the glorification of bad behavior. Now I disagree. I mean, there's a lot of rap that kind of talks about that stuff in a way that they try to kind of like build it up, like ego building. That's another whole conversation. But the art of peer pressure is about being kind of roped into something that you don't want to do and really puts a different picture on it. So it's a good access point. And then what he's doing is he's not just rhyming like the ends of a rhyme. Like it's not like people always make the joke when I'm typing out there. They're like, roses are red, violets are blue. But like he's going in, like I'm trying to think where's a good line in here. But bragging about the episode we just had, a shot of Hennessy didn't make me feel bad. I'm usually a firm believer in bad karma. Consequences from evil make your past haunt you. Like he's rhyming not just the ends of lines, but he's also putting like little like sounds and alliterations all throughout that line that kind of match up to each other. I love slant rhyming. Slant rhyming is when you're, you know, and then like you sometimes like in Hamilton, there's a couple of lines in one of Hamilton's, and I listen to Hamilton, yes. In one
Yeah.
of the clapbacks that Hamilton does when they're approaching him about misusing funds, about speculation, where he's just like every syllable is almost like in rhyme with each other, and he's just
Hmm.
going down on that, and it's I get such inspiration from those moments. Like spoken word is super powerful, and then you get into this beat. And one of the poems I wrote for um, Akira the Don has a lot of that repetition in it. Like this is kind of where it leads to when you're actually writing. Because
Yeah,
I was,
you mentioned you're a huge fan of Akira the Don.
oh
That's
my
something I
goodness,
wanted
please.
to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, let me read this part because this is the part, and it's not like it's kind of coming from left field. Like it's about kind of about persevering through the difficulty. But this is where rap influences me heavy. So I wrote, there was a moment we never did see when it seemed this dreaming could never be a mode of yeeting, leaving you fleeting, seeking the meaning you have been conceiving, night streaming so defeating. And this is typewritten. This is not like
Yeah.
me going through a beat. It's
Yeah.
so like finding the syllable and lurching onto that. I hope that makes sense. I just got really into the moment with that.
No, it does. You if the words come together in rhythm, you don't always need a beat to convey the emotion behind it, like you just did.
Yeah,
So
and the biggest part, just to mention, the biggest part of what I do on the street is the reading. Like I'll type the poem, it'll be great. I'll be talking to people about their life. The moment I read it, everything shifts a little bit. And that's why I think it's very important for anybody that's interested in being a street poet or anything like that to really get into how to read and the reading style. You and I both did Toastmasters, so we get that. Because that is the moment where
shout out to Toastmasters.
Toastmasters, yes, absolutely. And that's the moment where it starts to click in people's heads because we also are very everybody can hear. People reading on a page, it can guys can kind of glaze over, but we all listen.
Yeah, and just if people don't know what Toastmasters is that are listening, it's a group where you can practice your public speaking, and they are all over the country. And if you have any hesitations about public speaking, which almost every single person does, I highly recommend joining. And so Akira the Don,
yes,
we messaged before the podcast, and you mentioned that Akira the Don has been a huge influence on you. He is a musician, but he's a different type of musician, and he specializes in meaning wave. For people who may not be familiar with meaning wave and Akira the Don, which I was not before I looked into him, how would you describe his music, and how did Akira the Don, how has he influenced your writing and your poetry?
So Akira the Don is a DJ and artist. He's currently based out of LA, but he is moving to Texas. But he's been a big lo-fi artist. He also had done a lot of rap, but what he started doing was he started mixing in lo-fi and motivational speeches, TED Talks, interviews, you name it, from a lot of what I would term modern philosophers, like Jordan Peterson, the David Goggins, Jocko Willink, a little bit Alan Watts. He does a lot of Alan Watts. And so he mixes them in. It's not just like, the lecture straight and then a lo-fi beat. He really mixes the words into a verse chorus format and basically turns it into a song. With and he kind of dives a little bit into synthwave and other things. Basically, it's lo-fi with these speakers, with these speeches, with this wisdom. And so it is extremely accessible and extremely easy to, kind of repeat and incant and intune the lessons that come from these speeches because they get repeated in the song, like as a chorus or something like that. Like his most famous thing is when Jordan Peterson talked about cleaning up your room as a way to start trying to change the world around you. And so it's just a whole song. It's just, clean up your room. And then like he'll go into the verses. But beyond that, he also is a community builder. Like what he did when quarantine started, when everything went down with quarantine, everybody went through this really interesting time of suddenly things are about to change. Like there was no person in the world unaffected by that. What he did is he started streaming every night a DJ set. Every night. And he has been doing it for like 115 nights straight on YouTube. No breaks, no exceptions. The guy is prolific. And so what I learned from his demonstration is just that sense of devotion and discipline. And it comes from someone who obviously has to listen to these things a lot to really mix them in. And this will come shocking, but I haven't read a lot of these guys. I haven't listened to a lot of these lectures. Like, I didn't know who Jordan Peterson was before I got into Akira the Don, which is
So
crazy.
he's introducing you to a lot of the modern philosophers that he uses.
Yes. And it's in such an easy 5.5 minute way.
Yeah. So he basically takes, just so if I'm understanding it correctly, he takes the words that someone like Jordan Peterson or David Goggins is saying, and then he mixes it with the lo-fi style music, and he creates a song from it.
Albums.
Albums
And song. Yeah, but like, yeah, absolutely. That is exactly what he's doing. Yeah.
That's cool with the live streams too. I've really respected the artists that are maintaining their connection any way they can with their audience. And Akira the Don is on my list of artists to dive into because of you. And someone that I have been paying attention to during quarantine is Machine Gun Kelly. He's another rapper, and now he's into, he's done rock music, alternative. He's getting into singing too, which is pretty crazy because he started out just as a rapper. But he basically said, okay, I know I'm not in the studio. I can't really work with people in person. What can I do in quarantine? So he started putting out these remixes and videos every week, and he would do Paramore remixes. He would do Mike Posner remixes. He was thinking of songs from every single genre. And even though, he wasn't making money from putting remixes out there, it was a way for him to stay connected with the fans, and it was like this fun thing that he was doing, and I'm sure for him it was beneficial too, because he was getting to explore different areas of his artistry, getting to explore his voice. I'm sure it was very uncomfortable at first to try to sing when people know you as a rapper. And kind of going off what you said about Akira the Don, where he streamed 115 days straight, I really respected and admired Machine Gun Kelly for putting out these great videos and great remixes, because a lot of artists, for whatever reason, dropped off the map during quarantine. I know a lot of people are struggling, and it's hard to make a living from your art when it relies on an audience. But I've really respected the artists that have found a way to maintain that connection however they were able to, and it sounds like Akira the Don did a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, and I have so much respect and so much empathy for artists that had trouble creating, because I know a lot of street poets that had trouble creating. I even went through a basic 2-week stint where I didn't write a word, and I was kind of standing back and watching things happen, because everybody had to kind of come to this in their own way. So it's not meant to be at all a criticism of people that are still having trouble creating, because there is a depressive pall on everything that we do now. You go out literally wearing a mask every time. So it's tough. It's tough to have that creative, vibrant mentality. But I think that the artists that do, it's funny because we started the conversation talking about placing yourself for art and then waiting for that inspiration. But there is also a flip side to that, where you figure out the way to create almost on demand, to figure out the way to push through and to just throw something blank onto the page, something onto the blank page. Yeah. And I think that there's this, that sense of duty and that sense of industry. Like, one of the songs that is a fantastic starting point for Akira the Don is one of his Jocko Willink remixes called Good. And it's all about, it was just this little section of Jocko talking about how whenever a problem happens, he says good. Like, if something goes wrong in his business, he says good. This is an opportunity to fix something and make it better. Like, I recently found out I have a minor health issue. I said good, because this means that I can fix that health issue and be better in the future. It's about taking those negative moments and turning them into the positive. Not in a way that's kind of cliche, but it's more just about diving in and finding the best of a situation. And that was just what Akira did, is he just said good to the entire situation. This is, everybody's suddenly locked inside. I'm going to double down on streaming. And from a business standpoint, it's inspiring. From an artistic standpoint, it's inspiring. So yeah, it was just cool.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson?
I have not. I've heard about it, and I floated around the not giving a fuck Reddit pages for a short time in my life at a certain point because I just found that philosophy to be so cool. Just kind
Yeah. What you were talking about, not waiting for inspiration, but finding a way to create, especially during a time in quarantine where a lot of that inspiration is absent. Mark Manson in the book The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck writes about something called the do something principle, which is exactly that. Basically, you have two choices. You have the choice of waiting for inspiration to strike you, which is always out of your control. You're not in control of, when that is going to flow through you, or you can take action, even if it's shitty action at the beginning, like just, recording 5 minutes of a shitty podcast or writing 200 terrible words or, editing, 10 minutes of shitty video, whatever it is. Let that action create the inspiration for what you need to keep going, because a lot of times you're going to record things that are shitty or write things that are shitty.
Yeah.
I have a lot of experience with that, but that kind of gets you going and gets you in the flow, and maybe there may be a line or 30 seconds that's usable and kind of launches, you use it as a launching point for something that's better, even though you told yourself, all right, I'm just going to write something shitty today and I'm going to throw it out completely. And then you go back and you're like, oh, that line's actually kind of cool. I might use that for something. So it's like you have to take action first to almost create that internal inspiration for yourself to keep going. And if you're always waiting for that lightning to strike, you could find yourself waiting for months or years. And it's just like that first step of getting yourself going is the most important part.
Absolutely. And I think like what's good is we can it's like we can revisit what we were kind of talking about in the beginning about the lady from Eat Pray Love. And it's not that you should sit in front of a blank page for 5 to 6 hours waiting for inspiration. It's you should write 5 to 6 hours. Even if the first hour or two of writing is total like garbage, like just words on a page that you're kind of throwing on there. But one of the really neat things that it kind of helped bring it full circle is that about doing the street poetry, and for a lot of artists that do this either connective or performative art and art that involves other people, is that it forces artists like that to come up with something. Like you got to come up with something. Like you're sitting here asking me questions. You got to ask those questions. Like if we sit here in dead silence for 2 minutes and it's not a podcast. So you have to come up with something. When I put myself out there on the street, I have to be ready to come up with literally whatever the person is about to throw at me. And a lot of times it doesn't come out perfect. But the fact is like I figured out how to come up with something at the, at someone else's demand. And so it has placed me in a situation which has taught me not to hesitate when it comes to writing and when it comes to creating. So like if anybody is ever struggling with that hesitation with art, they should bring another person into it. They should be there so that they have someone that holds them accountable and tells them, hey, you should write this or you should write that. Because when you have to follow that cue, amazing things happen. A big quote that I've been following, that I've been really implementing more in my life is a quote from Patton. I might have actually heard it on this podcast, I think. I don't know, but it was
maybe.
Yeah, I heard it somewhere. It was don't I don't remember where I heard it, but it was don't tell people how to do something, tell people what to do, and they will shock you with their ingenuity. And so it's one of those things that when I'm leading people, I try to help inspire them to come up with the solutions on their own. But also when we're just creating, we just got to, sometimes we have to be told, and then we have to just jump into it. Like there's no other option when I'm sitting out there than to create.
Do you feel like you've gotten better at empathy from being a poet? Because when you're commissioned to write a love poem, for example, for someone else, and I saw a few when I was going through your Instagram where you were writing things for someone else's lover, you have to I would imagine you have to kind of get inside the mindset of, okay, if I were this person's lover, how would I say these words but still make it authentic to where that person would think it was coming from the person that they love too. Do you feel like being a poet has allowed you to better jump inside people's minds and kind of step inside their situation?
It definitely has. I think that example is one that I actually struggle with, because street poet recently gave me the advice that when it comes to love poems, what you try to do is you don't try to write a love poem from the lover to someone else, because that could come off way wrong if you're not delicately handling that situation. Like, oh look, I just wrote a love poem to your wife. That'll that'll get a lot of people upset.
Yeah,
But
and then she leaves you for the poet. She's like, his words were so powerful. I fell in love with him. It worked.
So what I do is I try to write about what someone loves. If someone says, I want you to write a poem for my wife, I go, what does she like? And then I write a poem about something she likes, and then celebrating their love. So it's kind of a different strategy. But yes, there's a sense that I have to face the world as it is when I'm out there. I have to face whatever people are bringing to me. I have to face what they're going through in the ways that they're going through it. And that can be challenging to worldviews, definitely. And so, but I've definitely learned to try to understand, where people are coming from and what situations they might be going through a lot better. And the great thing is that when you release yourself from kind of where you're looking at, you get to see this amazing patchwork of humanity, like, for all that it's worth. So yeah, it has definitely. I hope that it has increased my sense of empathy. Poets can sometimes, when they're doing their job well, and it's not something that I credit to any sort of skill, is that they can in-tune what someone's feeling. Like, you start to pick up those extra little, like, hints and things like that, especially from it was funny when I watched Sherlock, and Sherlock's looking at a room and he sees 10,000 other things that people don't see. I sometimes get that feel like someone will come up and they'll be like, I want a poem about friendship. And then I look at them and their friend, and I go, what does this poem actually need to say about friendship? Like, I try to take it a step level.
Like, get more specific into it, not just I want something about this person, but what does this person love? You feel like being more specific makes it better?
Yeah, it does, but always relating it back to something beautifully, not general, but something beautifully thematic. It's always this kind of bridge between, you want to find a beautiful theme, and you also want to find something that's deeply personal for the person. So
yeah. So I know there are a lot of people that listen to this podcast, whether it's public or private, and I'm also asking for my own knowledge too, out of my own selfishness. But what advice do you have on becoming a better writer?
If you're not doing well writing, and you want to write more, write better, or write differently, I would change something radically about what you're doing with your writing, and also to think outside the box. There's somebody that's on Etsy, and I'm thinking about buying one of these for my wife. There's somebody on Etsy that's taking old photographs that they buy in antique stores, adding little notes to them, and selling them as gift cards. That's writing.
Wow.
They're getting into something that's a little avant-garde. I have somebody that's playing with stamps that look like typewritten letters. So they're kind of thinking outside the box. I mean, to say buy a typewriter would be too would be too.
Yeah.
But the thing that for me is that the typewriters got me into a different way of thinking. If distraction's your problem, then typewriters are the only distraction-free writing tool currently available for less than probably $100 in your local neighborhood. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I saw a quote the other day that 90% of your distraction comes from having your phone in the same room as you. So I took a cue from that, and I started putting my phone in the other room and closing the door, because I don't want the energy of the phone to leak over into the room. But it's true. Like, even on a laptop, there are things that pop up and other commitments, the things that you might not even have been thinking about, but just you have the technology right in front of you. So I'm sure the typewriter gets you more in the zone.
It absolutely does. And there's a romanticism about typewriters that is every writer has. Like if you go on any random writing website, like, this writing thing, that writing thing, you're going to see a typewriter in their logo or something somewhere, because typewriters are symbolic of the work of writing. But what's funny is that we've replaced them all with computers, and obviously we need computers to be able to I use computers all the time. I'm not like a Luddite, but it's more so that when it comes to actually creating those first words, a typewriter isolates you with just 4 rows of keys, a bunch of ink and paper, and you've got nothing else to stand in your way from writing what you feel. And then on top of that, there's a sense of work to it. Like I feel like that I'm actually creating something, because instead of typing into the cyberspace where I could forget to save something on Microsoft Word and then boom, it's gone. It's created right in front of me. I see the words appearing on the page.
Yeah, that's something that gives me anxiety sometimes. I think about the things that I write that get shot off into the cloud on Google Docs or Microsoft Word or whatever, and I'm like, what if something goes wrong with the server one day and everything I've ever written or created is just gone? And if you have something in a hard copy, that's not a problem. You can access it whenever you want as long as you're there. So both have their positives and negatives.
Absolutely. If a fire rips through my apartment, then I'm going to be in depression for weeks, because I have so much typewritten stuff in here. So
yeah, but it's nice it feels nice to have the physical copy of something, and I do that on a very small level. It's nowhere near the level of having a typewriter, but when I go through books now, I'll wait a few weeks and then go back to the underlined sections and then write out the ones that stand out on an index card, and I'll put them into separate categories, which is something I actually learned from another writer named Ryan Holiday, who I like a lot. And the physical act of writing it down on the index cards, the extra work of doing that as opposed to typing it out on the computer, makes me more selective about what I'm writing down, because if I was doing it on a Google document, I would probably feel compelled to write down every little thing that I underlined in the book, which would basically be like writing the book over again. But the fact that I have to write it down on index cards, I'm like, oh fuck, like this is actually work. I could feel my hand cramping up. It takes way longer than typing it out on the laptop. If I fuck up, I have to go cross it out and do this work to revise it. So I'm going to be much more selective about what I write. So I would imagine I would imagine that when you're on a typewriter, some of that work selection relationship transfers.
Absolutely.
Where you're more selective about what you're writing down, because you can't just backspace it and have a fresh page.
Yeah, it does make you think a little more. It also does teach you to write on your feet when you do write something and you go, crap, I got to use this now. Like I've typed out words and poems and went, no, that's not what I want. And I go, well, that's what you're stuck with. But also, I have, and believe it or not, it's something that you kind of just help reveal for me that I have been doing that I haven't realized, is that I have been subconsciously being more picky about which drafts I work on, which drafts I save, what do I do with all this paper? Because when I was running off of Google Docs and Evernote, Evernote for the win, that was where it's where I started with all my poetry. I would keep everything and I would try to sort everything. And frankly, there's a lot of crap in there. And there's a lot of crap that still comes off my typewriter that I learned, all right, we can throw that in the garbage can, because that's not something that I need to save. So it's more that for me, that act happens more so in what do I choose to save and what do I choose not to save? Like in, the pile of papers that is my desk. Yeah.
What is something that people would be surprised to learn about you?
That is a fantastic question. Give me a moment. I want to make sure that I answer it in a way that. Yeah.
It's a long form podcast, so we have all the time in the world.
Oh yes, absolutely. When it comes to, well, I'm deeply passionate about my faith. I have to kind of rest on that, because that used to be something I used to be very public about, and now I'm very private about it. Um, and but I am I'm a Catholic, and I really dive deep into the not so controversial aspects of the faith and find a lot of meaning in those things. Um, I think that that's something that people would be surprised to to learn about me. I haven't, when someone, I don't talk about that outwardly when it comes to my poetry. When someone comes up and asks, "Can I get a poem, that with Christian themes?" I get excited, and again, it's not to be. I'm not trying to be like, out loud. I'm not trying to be out and crazy about it. It's more that, yeah, I get to write about this thing that I'm deeply passionate about. But yeah, it's something that I think would surprise a lot of people that talk to me today.
Yeah, the connection to the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for people who are listening, maybe even someone we went to high school with, we went to the same high school, Chaminade High
Yeah.
School in Mineola, and yeah, even though it sounds like we haven't been on the same journey with faith, I still, no matter how strong my faith is, I still recognize how important it is as a structure for people, and that you can't really understand society unless you understand religion. You
Yeah.
can't. It's not even if you you know even if you don't believe in something, to completely disregard it as bullshit is to ignore to ignore how people think and understanding how people go about this world, and what it's like to be them and how they're making decisions, which is so important, especially as a creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, like, I've been thinking a lot about, like, meaning systems, that, like, everybody has some sort of meaning system. It's kind of like, it's kind of like culture, that people are, what they think about, what they hold to their heart, what they find to be important and of value, definitely, it varies from person to person to person. And like, what was extraordinary about, I think, a lot of the changes that have been happening in my life recently is I used to be a lot more tied to the faith in terms of meaning, and I still
Hmm.
am, but I think that there are, some things which we don't really need to go into because they've been widespread across the news, that have really challenged me in terms of, does this faith have meaning for me? And I still
Hmm.
believe certain things that are definitely very strong in my heart, but there's other things where I go, wow, that, there's a lot of trouble here. And but when it comes, so like I've just discovered is, like, in my poetry and the interactions with other people, and just, my day-to-day jobs, I work nonprofits sometimes as well.
Hmm.
I find a very deep sense of meaning. And it's interesting because I think it's also changed a way about how I view my religion. Like, is religion just supposed to be one of those things? Is it supposed to be something that kind of sits in the back with all those things? So yeah, I think those are some of the things that um, I've also learned and seen with all that.
I'm curious. How do you look back on your Chaminade years?
Um, I look back on them. Um, they There's a lot of things that I can pull from them. I think that they led me down a path that, in retrospect, I might have taken a different path, but I found a way through that path, if that kind of makes sense. Like, I think
Hmm.
that I was processing a lot through my Chaminade years, and, like, like, there's some practical things, like, I wish that I had not been so ambitious about college when I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do with college. But, like, Chaminade, I think, taught us that, is to be super ambitious with our college expectations. And then, sorry, we
No, no,
gotta.
no, you're good.
My wife's has to take out the dog.
It's all
Um,
good.
um, but the I think that the other thing that,
It makes me think of my dog
yeah.
back home.
Yeah, yeah. We adopted. We rescued this beautiful little Pomeranian about a year ago at this point now, and he's just a ball of fun. And but yeah, so Chaminade, and I think that it was really good for me to learn a side of the faith that, while I understand it, I wouldn't necessarily go die on a hill for. But it's
Hmm.
also taught me that a lot of people would, and a lot of people in a lot of different religions really don't want their religion to interact with the rest of the world. They find it
Hmm.
insular. They find that they want to create just an interest around that faith, and around the little nuances of that faith. Uh, but that's not what faith is about in my view.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, I definitely look back on the all guys aspect of being
Mm.
much more beneficial than what I realized at the time, because I think
Yeah.
it was super important as a guy, for me at least, to be able to develop and go through adolescence and not have the worry of what are girls going to think of me enter into my mind during the day. Like, there's so much anxiety and bullshit that you deal with in school and going through puberty and growing up as a teenager, that like not having the aspect of, okay, and I also need to be attractive to the opposite sex all day
Mhm.
while I'm at school, kind of takes away a layer that you don't need to worry about, and lets you, for me at least, be more myself and say things and do things and take risks that I may have not taken had it been a co-ed school. So that was a big positive for me.
Yeah, and that was one of those things where I was like, "There's a lot in my head, but what do I want to pick out and say?" Because that one is just that for me is almost like a given. Like
Hmm.
I really did learn how to and like, because also there was the reverse of that is also that you learn how to build strong, um, you know, it's just strong friendships with guys. Like
Hmm.
I think that I learned how to be able to feel comfortable just hanging out with a group of guys and socializing, because that's all that we did, is we just hung out like that. And so that was something that I really did find was valuable in all of that. Is and also there was a lot of the rigor too of just the education. It was a
Hmm.
good school. It was just, they did things well there for that part of it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point that they're about the men having friendships. I think a lot of guys suffer more than they have to because they don't develop strong relationships with men, or they think that talking about their feelings with other guys somehow makes them weak or soft. And in high school, where 15 years old, we're going to talk shit to each other.
Mhm.
People are going to do mean things. People are going to act like assholes, and I was not immune to that. There are many things that I did that were, not many, but there were things that I did that weren't nice to people in high school, that were part of that male to male relationship. But now that I'm older, I see the value in having really close friendships with other guys and being able to talk through things with other guys and having a strong male friend group in the same way that you don't you talk about things differently than you would with your female partner if you're heterosexual.
Yeah.
It's not the same bonding. You're opening up in both situations, but one is more it's just different. It hits differently to talk to a group of guys and be open and know that you can still be masculine, you can still be a man and talk about the way things make you feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Something I wanted to end on, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, is uh, your marriage, because less and less people are getting married, and especially where I'm in New York City, it's not common to be married around our age. Most people are waiting until their 30s, mid 30s, if they get married. So for you, what have been the ways that, or there are probably too many to mention, but what is a standout or maybe underrated way that marriage has made your life better that it doesn't get enough credit for?
Um, well, it whips you into shape real quick, and it also it means that you have a very, I mean, for me, it's a sense of comfort for me, because there is a charted path forward. We know what the way forward is. It's together, and we'll figure that out. And we are, my wife and I really are, call us idealistic, but we really do firmly believe that we want to be married, and we ever never want to think about divorce. Like, we take it in the what I would call the traditional Catholic way. But there's so much meaning that I have found attached to that, and that's not something that happens overnight. And it's so what frustrates me now about people that are, say, Catholic, that they'll go out and they'll say, "Oh, this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing." But the fact is they can say that or they can feel that because they've been going a certain direction for the entirety of their lives. Like other people are coming from a way different perspective, and so there must be a lot more mercy and just whatever, care and what, do whatever, love God and do what you will, said Augustine. But the fact is for my marriage, it's been so valuable to dive deep into one person. And I mean that on all the levels. I mean that on the emotional level. I mean that on the mental level. I mean that on the physical level. Like there's a sense that like there is a value in kind of taking life at its variety, and that's definitely there. For me, I have found that my wife is an infinite story, which I will always be reading and will never be able to finish, and in a way that every day grows more beautiful, sometimes more confusing, and sometimes more frustrating. But you get the sense that you're, and it builds a sense of focus around that too. Like I love that about being married young and early. There's a line in an Arcade Fire song, and and actually it's funny that I kind of get to it is that like I want to have a child while I'm still young. We have so much, for me, it was that when I want to get married young and early because I do want to be able to have, this wonderful relationship and a family while I have so much energy and I'm growing and I'm budding in the world. And children can sometimes hamper that. There's no, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but when we do decide to start having kids, it's going to be fun because I'm going to be able to, especially if we start to have them soon, I want to show them what their young, spry, crazy street poet busking father would be doing, and give them that sense of creation. While I might be settled at 40 or 50 doing something totally different, hopefully not, but so, yeah.
Yeah, that's something that people don't really think about, is that if you have kids young and say you watch them graduate from college at the age of 47 or 48, when most people may have kids or 10-year-olds or something like that, it's like you're still a young man and you have kids that are supporting themselves. So it's like you get a whole nother period of your life where you still have that young man's energy, even though you're not a 20-year-old anymore, but you have the freedom to pursue it outside of the day-to-day fatherhood because your kids are on their own.
Yeah. And then another thing that really also stands out is, and I can't explain it because I know people that are in long-term living together relationships that have described things very differently, but something, and I did spend some time living with my wife before we got married, just for the practicality of her coming down to Winchester and me joining her. Something drastic changes when you get up on that altar, and suddenly, like, I think like it was like a few weeks after we had said I do, we both started like turning into our parents, and we were like, holy crap, what are we doing? Like, and so it changes you. It just does. And I love that about it. And that's just where I've found so much meaning in my life, is through her. And I moved here because of her. You also, you learn that sense of devotion, sacrifice, and loyalty. I've helped her out with her shows. She's helped me out with my poetry. I've called her Mrs. Poet sometimes when we're doing letters. So yeah. And so it's funny because I go to this image and it's a really weird and dark image, but in House of Cards, there's this moment where Kevin Spacey, and I don't remember the name of the actress, where they're acting together, and they were like, we're a team. And then of course they go and they do dark, dastardly things. But like my wife and I we would die for each other. Like, we have that sense of loyalty. I mean, I obviously we'd have to see if the cards were down, what would really happen. But I really, she's my teammate through everything.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen House of Cards, but they definitely have that type of relationship where it's like, even though it's a dark path, they still have each other's back. And I get a similar feeling from, I don't know if you've watched the show Billions, but that is more of a hedge fund situation where you have this billionaire who's a cutthroat finance guy, and he does a lot of shady things, but he also does a lot of great things. But his wife is cutthroat in the way that she supports him. So it's like they have this team bonding relationship that makes you think like, okay, yeah, sure, he does some messed up shit and she does some messed up shit, but like you have to respect the way that they have each other's back. Outside of the
Yeah.
morality of it, there's a way that they have each other's back that is something to aim for.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you again. This has been awesome. And next time you're up in New York when things are hopefully a little bit more normal, we'll have to grab a drink outside somewhere on a rooftop wherever they're serving food or drinks
Sure.
and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And I had another question. Are you commissioning remote poetry now? If people ask
Yes.
for a poem, could you kind of explain how that works for people that are listening in case they are interested, which you definitely should be?
Yeah, so I can do commission any poetry remotely. Again, most of the way that I work is kind of on a donation system. So if you really, really do think that it has value, I would hope that you would contribute. Average is usually 5-10 a poem, a little more if it's like a full page. But all you have to do is just message me and email me. I even have a PO box, and I love getting letters, and I love getting kind of writing back to people using the typewriter. So if the easiest way probably would be just by email, which is I have yourfriend@walkingmallpoet.com. It's probably the easiest way to get to me.
Yeah, and I'm gonna link everything in the podcast description. Your
Nice.
social, email, website, everything you need, and I'll point out where to go for commissioning a poem. And I have an idea for a poem that I'll be in touch with you
Definitely.
about. And I can't give you stacks of money in person because of the distance, but I'm definitely gonna slide some stacks into your Venmo account. I'll do it digitally. But yeah, thanks again for hopping on the podcast. I really do appreciate your time, and it was great talking to you.